Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Yet another busy news day with the Supreme Court making a landmark ruling regarding the president's tax returns and financial records. Obviously, the COVID outbreak only getting worse and worse. In fact, Dr. Anthony Fauci now talking about the need for drastic measures to deal with this pandemic.
Any state that is having a serious problem, that state should seriously look at shutting down.
Obviously, there's major daylight between the doctor and the president. We'll get to that shortly. Now, the U.S. setting another record with nearly 60,000 new cases in just the past day. As you can see from this chart, the trend line is going in only one direction, and that unfortunately is up. This map does a good job of showing the areas getting hit the hardest. All of that orange and red you see indicates a rapid growth in the numbers of people testing positive. The Sun Belt from Florida all the way to Southern California loaded with hotspots. Despite all of that, the president is still pushing for schools to reopen this fall with kids in classrooms, sending a tweet saying Democrats want to keep them closed because it's good for them politically. He even threatened to cut funding if they don't reopen. I should mention nearly all of the money for schools comes from local governments, so it could be an empty threat, but obviously with the budget dilemma states are facing right now, some view this, I think, fairly as extortion. Now, the president is even squabbling with the CDC over school guidelines because Trump wants to loosen them up, which is something that Senator Cory Booker will talk to me about in a moment. But we could be getting a good indication of what may happen if kids head back to school. Maybe a canary in the coal mine. Several day camps, they reopened this summer, but now many are closing, including one in Missouri, where 82 kids and staff have tested positive for COVID. Tonight, we will look at all of that and much more. A law professor will join us to discuss the implications of the Supreme Court ruling and what they mean for things like checks and balances and presidential power. We'll also show you what is going on inside the ERs of some of the hardest hit states as they get slammed with COVID cases with no end yet in sight. Plus, new questions about whether or not the president actually reads his intel briefings or even listens to the intel experts who are trying to fill him in. This issue getting renewed attention after reports that his briefings included information about the Russians paying bounties to the Taliban to kill U.S. troops in Afghanistan. But before we get to any of that, let's bring in our first guest. He's perfect to discuss all those issues and more. Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey. He serves on, among other things, the Judiciary and the Foreign Relations Committee. He's kind enough to give us a few minutes. And Senator, let me first start off with the Supreme Court today. In some ways, a mixed bag. It defines that not even this president is above the law, but at the same end, the likelihood of voters being able to know what's in those returns before November, somewhere between slim and none. How do you regard the developments of today?
I think you described it aptly. It is a justification that consistently the Supreme Court has said over and over again, going all the way back to Richard Nixon and the Nixon tapes, that no president is above the law. But this president has been able to flaunt the law, wrestling it up in legalese and legal procedures that have enabled him to go into yet another election and not doing what every president has done back to Jimmy Carter, which is to release their tax returns, to let Americans know with great transparency what they've been doing. Well, we already know as a nation that he is engaged in a lot of activities with his financial background that have been unfortunate, have evaded taxes, as the New York Times reported, and perhaps been involved in other things that are unbecoming, unseemly, or potentially, as we see with this grand jury investigation, potentially illegal. So I am frustrated with this, but I do think that so many other issues afoot here that the American public has a very good understanding of who he is, and hopefully we'll see at the polls in November that they reject this president and his presidency.
Well, let's get next, if we could, Senator, to COVID, and more specifically, the dilemma facing a lot of your constituents and parents that are watching us tonight across this country, which is COVID in schools. And I want to remind people, if they missed it, what the CDC director, Mr. Redfield, had to say just yesterday about their guidelines or their ever-evolving ones.
Which of these guidelines are too tough? Which of these guidelines are impractical?
Again, I think it depends on how the schools put the portfolio together. Clearly, we see some individuals are concerned about the 6-foot distancing. Others individuals are concerned about face masks. Other individuals are concerned about rotating schedules. But I think this is why we put it there, as was said by one of your previous guests. These decisions about schools are local decisions.
You know, Senator, we've talked before over the years about the frustrations with the current Attorney General, in that I think fairly people wonder if he's basically a political arm of the president or he is our top law enforcement officer upholding the rule of law. You're in New Jersey right now. I know while you're there, you're going to have a conversation, I'm sure, with the governor about the issue about possibly the president withholding funding. I would say extortion. Conversely, you're talking to your constituents and saying, what do I do with my kid in the fall when we have more questions than answers? Do we now have to look at the CDC as a political arm? We were trusting them for science and direction. It seems if the president fires off an angry tweet, their guidance changes by the hour.
Yeah, look, the president has shamefully made this more about him than it is our children and the well-being of our families. He has been weeks and weeks ago firing out missives to states that were taking precautions to keep their states safe. Remember, he was talking about liberating Virginia, liberating Michigan, trying to push them to open up. Well, we saw what happened to states that opened up too soon. This president has proven himself uniquely unqualified for this moment in time. And we see other nations that have handled this well from the beginning, have been disciplined, have had national directives, have had leaders that took this seriously. They're far and away ahead of where we are. They are able to open up. You see Scandinavian countries that are able to open their schools because they have successfully turned this virus, virtually ending the increases in spreads or deaths. We have not done that. And so this decision about schools, it's not a partisan decision. It's a simple one about science and the well-being of our children. And we should take every precaution to protect their health, the health of the professionals that work in those schools, as well as the families that have those children coming home and could potentially, if we haven't done this right, become asymptomatic spreaders. And this is not necessarily even a binary thing. There are degrees which to open. There are ways in which to do it, a lot of which require more funding for the schools. And this is a president that seems to even deny the resources we need to make those who want to open and open the right way be able to do so effectively. So this is almost just a fiction novel that we're looking at every day, to have a president that so is working against his own CDC, so working against the decisions of local leaders who are trying to follow health professionals. This is not about the fact that everyone wants our children to be able to go back to school safely and open up. Leaders who have children want to see that happening. But to do it and flying in the face of the science and medical professionals, epidemiologists, and others is to ask for disastrous results.
Another flashpoint that somehow has fallen in the headlines, but it really bothers me, and you're on foreign relations, I can imagine, the idea that our intelligence agencies put in a briefing that the Russians were paying bounties to the Taliban to kill our soldiers, and the president's pushing to put Russia in the G8, and we're freeing Taliban prisoners. I assume you guys are being kept in the dark. Please tell me we're going to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about, I mean, this is a president that seems to do 5 or 6 things every week that if Obama had done any of them, they would have become major scandals in which Republicans would have called for the resignation of the president. This is one of those things, again, the troops are on these sacred missions where they are somebody that in a bipartisan way we should be behind making them safe and secure. But this is a president that had credible intelligence information that said that the Russians were putting out a bounty, were paying to have them killed. And for the president to be aware of this, or high-level intelligence people to be aware of this, and to do nothing, for the president time and time again, since that intelligence was available, to engage with Putin, to do nothing, to say nothing, to engage in no strategy whatsoever to meet this despicable challenge is unacceptable. And the fact that they didn't make anyone in Congress aware of it. So this is one of those things that's just unconscionable. And we in Congress who are asking, Foreign Relations Committee asking to be briefed on these issues, have not even gotten the respect of that. So I just feel like this is a president from the very beginning has been an apologist for Russia, has, in the face of our allies, called for them to rejoin the G7 when they were kicked out of the G8 at that point because of what they did in Crimea, what they did in the Ukraine, where we have an international community of other Western democracies that seems to want to hold Russia accountable. And this is a president that seems to want to continue to accommodate Putin when what he's engaging in, a violation of international accords, a violation of sovereign nations, attacks on the United States of America, including our election systems, that should be met with strength, not capitulation. And it's unfortunate. I tell you, and this is not a partisan issue, because both Republicans and Democrats together, we have done things to try to push back on the president and get him to be tougher on Russia. But he has failed time and time again to show American strength and American resolve. And here, it's potentially deeply shameful that he's not showing, as commander-in-chief, a willingness to put our troops first and their defense and safety ahead of his relationship with Putin.
Well, I sure hope you guys haul some folks up for hearings on this, because if it somehow fades with all the insanity of the daily, news feed here, in terms of each day a news story or another 3 stories come out, put it behind, would be really a national shame. Finally, I had an idea. A lot of people really like the campaign you drove, and now that we're in a moment of national reckoning and overdue one on race in this country, not just with policing, but with equality. You mentioned before Republicans, some that want to do the right thing as it relates to national security, and I would think the party doesn't want or stand with the president on the Confederate flag, or they don't want to, be any part of tweets going on with white power shouts or the rest. We created the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11. What if we had a cabinet-level position of, let's say, equal opportunity, where it wasn't just lip service, we really got into it and tried to create policy? If we had a cabinet level with real authority, a real budget to try and at least finally have a level playing field in this country across more ways than I can think of, and a President Biden said, hey, Cory Booker, would you be secretary of something like this? Do you think something like that makes sense, and would that be something you'd get behind?
Look, I don't think at cabinet level, first of all, your intention and desire to have issues of race and reconciliation, equality and justice be prioritized at the highest levels of our government. What you're asking for is not just something that is urgently needed, but it's also common sense. I'm not sure if we need to create a cabinet position to do that. We just need a president that is going to put it at that level of priority and make sure that every single agency, whether it's Health and Human Services, whether it's education as we deal with the school to prison pipeline, whether it's Department of Justice as we do with enforcing pattern and practice investigations on our police departments, every single department needs to say that this is a fundamental priority in a country that believes in equality under the law and liberty and justice for all. So I'm not sure if they need to make a cabinet position to do that. I just want to make sure, and I've had these explicit conversations with Vice President Biden, and believe him when he says that this is going to be a priority, that he's going to have a cabinet that executes on doing the kind of things to make us a more equal and more just nation. And then as far as my future, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm excited about being New Jersey's senator, because New Jersey's given me the ability to be a senator at a time where I could literally co-author the policing legislation, that I could drive across the finish line bipartisan criminal justice reform that led to the liberation of thousands of Americans, that I could call for more equal funding of diseases like sickle cell anemia and achieve that, which is something that affects African Americans. Even the diversity within the Senate, work with Chuck Schumer to make Democratic senators publish their diversity statistics, which has led to significantly more women and minorities hired in the Senate. So I'm glad to have been able to, for 60 years, do the yeoman's work as New Jersey's senator to bring more equality and justice to our nation as a whole. And I'm just looking forward, God willing, to have another 6 years to do that.
Well, you have certainly an interesting window in history in front of you. I appreciate a few minutes with you, Senator. Thank you and Godspeed.
No, thank you very much for having me on, and I wish you the best.
All right, everyone. One of the subjects you heard me talk about with the senator is COVID, and we have some major updates for you, and I'm going to warn you, they're not good. Many cities in the South are where New York was in March and April. Packed ERs, shortages of supplies, A lot of people, unfortunately, passing away. After the break, we're going to take you inside one of the busiest hospitals in Houston as it struggles to save lives.